I'm Dr. Jeff Borden, and today I want to talk to you about learning frameworks, what they're used for, what they could be used for, when are they appropriate, and when maybe they're not. I'm a blogger. I write a lot. About once a week I put out a blog at least, as well as guest blogging and other things like that. Well, in the last couple of months, I've been in a minor blog war with another blogger. This other blogger gave the advice to people, and he's also a professor, by the way. He said, teachers need to stop looking at learning frameworks, that they're just too detrimental, they're too harmful, there's too many of them, so many of them are wrong. Now, he makes some decent points in his argument. For example, he talks about a study that was done with the American Psychological Association, where they got 668 participants, all of whom were teachers, and they asked them different things, and it came out during that research study that 91% of all teachers believe in the theory of learning styles, that people have an auditory or visual learning style. Unfortunately, that's just not true. There's a lot of other research that shows that that's absolutely nonsense, actually. And yet, a huge amount of educators believe it to be true. So that was one of the reasons that he gave. At the same time, he talks about how complex learning really is, but in these models, it's overly simplistic. It's too linear. It's building one thing on another that doesn't necessarily have to be built on. In reality, learning is just not quite this transactional. Learning is actually messy. How we start to take other things that we've learned, schema, and try to add it or attach it or juxtapose it or those sorts of things. Learning is messy. Learning is hard. And to those 2 points, I agree. I think that he was exactly right. But I think that there is some merit to the concept of a learning framework. See, I think when you look at people who are interviewed on television these days, a lot of them, not always, not when the opinion journalists get involved, but when a real news story is being perpetuated, they try to find people who know something about a topic in such a way that they are well-rounded on that topic. That well-rounded concept is all about frameworks. When people talk to Warren Buffett, they talk to Warren Buffett not because he has ignored all the frameworks. No. They talk to Warren Buffett because he knows all of the frameworks. He knows where the holes are. He knows where the limitations are. He knows where the overlap is. He understands what those frameworks are. The people in our world who are considered experts are considered so because they have a real understanding, a working knowledge of all of those frameworks. Now, they may not know all of them, but they certainly know a lot of them. And that's a major help to them in everything they do. When they take those frameworks and look at the mechanics that make them up, they know how to do that. They can go deep and wide and broad and narrow. Frameworks are really powerful. I think about one of my dear friends, one of my best friends, and a colleague who I have really come to respect, Dr. Gordon Sanson. Dr. Gordon Sanson is a retired biology professor from Monash University in Australia. But more than that, beyond that, Gordon is probably the world's foremost expert on teeth. He knows more about teeth than any person alive. He's probably right now writing the definitive work on it as we speak. But Gordon was actually brought in as an expert in one context that I think you may know something about. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie with Meryl Streep or heard the joke on Seinfeld that kind of also rekindled its fame. But the dingo ate my baby case, that was a real case. A lot of Americans don't know that, but it really did happen. There was a woman who fed her baby to a dingo to try to cover something up. Gordon was the expert brought in to talk about whether that dingo actually ate that child. Now, why could he talk about that? Because of his expertise in teeth. He understood the frameworks of different kinds of animals, of different kinds of teeth, of different kinds of jaws, of different amounts of pressure. He knew the mechanics, he knew the frameworks, he knew how they interspliced with one another. And as a result, he knows definitively whether or not she fed her baby to the dingoes. That's frameworks in action. Gordon is an expert because he understands so many frameworks around teeth. Well, this has led some people, when I talk about these things, to ask me, okay, so Dr. Borden, are you an expert on teaching and learning? Well, I don't know that I would go so far as to say I'm an expert on anything, but I can tell you this. I have reviewed and viewed hundreds of learning theories and learning style frameworks and teaching frameworks and instructional frameworks. I look at Bloom's taxonomy, for example, and it frustrates me to no end, first of all, that so many faculty are still clinging to something that was created back in the 1950s. But second, most faculty have no idea that there's actually 3 domains in Bloom's taxonomy. They only know about the cognitive domain. That's a problem. At the same time, I already talked about the learning styles problem, but the learning styles concept has really given way to some other things, like the cone of learning by Dale. It talks about the auditory and the kinesthetic and those sorts of sensory elements. And that just is very, very weak. It doesn't jive with other things we know. I think about Knowles' model of andragogy, and it's just biased in my opinion. The idea that children don't need to know why, but adults do, that in and of itself is wrong. If you've ever had a child and wanted to explain something to them, they want to know why desperately. And when they do know why, it can really make a big difference. So there's all kinds of problems with that model. Similarly, you've got quality matters. I've been working in e-learning my entire career, and I've seen a lot of e-learning courses built with the quality matters rubric. They're boring. They're just not engaging to many students. Do the boxes get ticked? Sure. But I just don't think that it is a framework that really will get you going. There are hundreds of these things that I have looked at over time. What have I landed on then as learning frameworks? Well, believe it or not, I've made my own. I've taken the things that other people have used. I stand very much on the shoulder of giants, and I have tried to build out some learning frameworks for myself. They involve 2 ladders, a circle, a triangle, 4 different X, Y axes concepts, and a Venn diagram. Now, when you hear that, you may say, well, that's interesting. What gives you the right to do that? Well, I didn't just build them out of thin air. I utilized the literature, the work, the research that's been done in teaching and learning concepts and contexts, and outside of that as well. I know that most subject matter experts in higher education, most faculty, spend very little, if any, time studying teaching and learning. They study their subject matter a lot. About 85% of the time they study their subject matter if the research is right. They look at process. They get professional develop on process so that they can submit their grades and turn in their reports, but they don't study teaching and learning. The assumption that just because somebody knows a lot about something means they can teach something about it, or that people will learn something about it from that person, I think is a horribly misplaced assumption. There's a lot that goes into learning. Most faculty don't know about the zone of proximal development. Most people in higher ed have no idea about cognitive load. They don't know if Sweller's theory has merit or not. They don't know about authentic assessment and how the desirable difficulties fit into or filter the authentic assessment options. At the same time, most people in higher education don't know that there are other domains that are just as important that need to feed information in order for learning to take place. They don't understand the power of connection between humans. They don't understand the importance of grit or resilience or tenacity. And that without those things, we literally see students who are unable to learn. As a studier of communication, I realized that there are 7 aspects of nonverbal communication, which can be delivered face-to-face, they can be delivered at distance, but most faculty don't even think about that. They think of the teaching part of this as art or style, and some people like it and some people don't. That's just not true. We know from norms of communication within cultures that certain behaviors are better than others, and we can leverage those if we know them. I have read voraciously about all of these things and much, much more, trying constantly to find the pieces that I can hang my hat on, the things that can be replicated, the things that work, the things we know to be true, not just the theoretical models, the things that have been proven over and over again. And when I go even to social media, I follow people who talk about this stuff. I follow people who post about this stuff. This to me is important. Let me give you an example of one of the frames that I use. It comes from Make It Stick, Brown's work back in, I think, 2014. You know, one of the other frames that I follow has to do with the power of note-taking. And Make It Stick actually talks about note-taking, but so do some other places. And so here are the notes that I was taking when I was reading Make It Stick. I was actually leveraging inking, I was leveraging drawing, just like you're supposed to, like the neuroscientist Stephen Carroll recommends when he talks about taking neural-based notes. But I've turned that into my own version of the framework. Now, it's not mine. It's Brown's and Bjork and some of those, but this is the way that I look at it. It's a ladder. And it's a stair-step model that I'm constantly trying to climb up to the top of so that I get all of this involved. See, as I said, I've got some ladders, I've got a circle, and I've got a triangle, and I've got these axes frames. When these things are at play in my world, I actually am comparing and contrasting and correlating the different pieces from them all the time. When I get a new framework, I hold it up against those other ones. So going back to the learning styles inventory, one of the reasons that it became pretty apparent early on that this wouldn't work is because of the neurotransmitter framework that really comes from some of the work of John Medina and some of the other neuroscientists out there that talk about some of the elements that we need in order to learn. The problem is the things we need to learn are all over the sensory continuum. There is no such thing as a learning style that only applies to one person. We're too complex. We're too variable rich. So it just doesn't hold water. As I think about those frameworks then, I start to take the ones that work and I compare them to each other. See, there are points of intersection all along these frameworks. I know, for example, that disequilibrium, which when it's created, it generates norepinephrine in the brain, that is a crucial component of the storytelling arc, the arc plot, as it's often called, that is a real good way to keep people informed, but also persuaded, but also entertained. It's a really good thing to give them in terms of novelty, which goes back to our desirable difficulties framework. It also, when it comes to other learning theories, is something that is an abstract concept that generates a compelling question. When you think about communication practices, if you want to persuade someone, you have to have some sort of disequilibrium. You have to have tension. You have to have that complexity of conflict. These all work together. Now, I will then take some of those intersected pieces as I'm thinking about a teaching and learning experience, and I will put them through some of the other filters. I will think, for example, if I'm trying to deliver this at scale through education technology, I use Pointedura's model for SAM. We're trying to go up through augmentation, through modification, getting all the way up to redefinition. At the same time, I'm trying to push that through the learning triangle, talking about the need for affective and quantitative information, not just cognitive. And then again, another model that I always try to leverage is based on generative learning, which again feeds back to Bjork and Brown and Make It Stick, that talks about the order of operations for learning, what I call do first learning. When those are all in place, whether I'm going forward or backward, and I can do this inductively and deductively, that's when I get to what I have created called Education 3.0. It is sort of a meta framework, if you will, that encompasses all of the others. That's my starting point. So again, you can start at the macro, you can start at the micro, you can go either direction. But as I do it, this is often where I go. I ask myself, does this get toward connected neural learning or not? Does this fit somewhere between neuroscience and learning science, or does it actually really sit in that area of education technology? The question for me is really not about the framework so much as when it comes to asking the question, are you an expert on teaching and learning? I don't know. I can't answer that without some information. And I think the best way to talk about that information is for you to explain to me what your learning frameworks are. When you do that, we can have a conversation. We can have a debate. We can talk about points of intersection, points of overlap. We can talk about limitations. We can talk about stopping points. We can talk about things that work and things that don't work. And then, and really only then, I'll know if you're a teaching and learning expert. Thank you.